And this meeting will also be uploaded to our YouTube channel for reference. You can see our previous sort of part one of this panel at this YouTube link. Let's see. Yeah, without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole to get us started with some other introductions.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. We have a really exciting group of panelists here to speak with us about different social work careers that are available for MSW students and perhaps those that are returning to the field. My name is Nicole Urban. I am a MSW student at SUNY Brockport, and I'm about halfway through my MSW program. I'm also an intern at the MSW New York State chapter, where I'm a member of the Student Leadership Committee. So big thank you to the Student Leadership Committee and staff at the chapter for putting together this event. This is the final part of a two-part chapter chat series titled, What Can You Do with an MSW? And like Nell said, the first part is uploaded to the NISW New York State YouTube page, so you can check that out later. And some information about the Student Leadership Committee. So they're responsible for recruiting student members, developing support structures for social work students across New York State, and contributing to the Social Work Student Conference. And we're going to drop some information here in the chat about the SLC or the Student Leadership Committee and how you can join if you're interested. And now wait, let me a second. There it is. And then I'm going to pass it off to one of our co-facilitators and BSW board representatives, Ming Wang, to introduce themselves and one of the other co-facilitators.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ming. I am currently a BSW student at Skidmore College, and I will be graduating just in a few weeks. And I am also one of the co-chairs for the Student Leadership Committee at MSW New York State, and I will be your chat moderator for tonight. And feel free to type in if you have any questions or concerns. Feel free to direct message me, and I'll collect your questions for our panelists in the end of the Q&A section. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. And let's see. Thank you, Ming. Thank you, Nicole. My name's Nell. I'm the program coordinator here at MSW New York State. So help, facilitate some of the programs, our CE programs, our, and also help staff the Student Leadership Committee as well. So I'm excited to be co-facilitating with Nicole today and to have this really awesome group of panelists. So I'm going to pass it off to Nicole to sort of quickly introduce the panelists, and then we'll get to the questions.
So first up, we have Emily Carveth. She is a veterinary social worker for Central Hospital for Veterinary Medicine, located in North Haven and Guilford, Connecticut. Next, we have Dr. Ivan Godfrey. He is a forensic social worker, as well as an associate professor at SUNY Ulster and visiting professor at Russell Sage College and UAlbany. And finally, we have Dr. Akoni. She has experience in school social work and is currently the Assistant Dean of Student Services and Clinical Associate Professor at the School of Social Welfare at Stony Brook University. So we're very excited to have them here tonight, and we've prepared a list of questions that we think can help illuminate the vastness and diversity of the social work field. So let's get started.
So fabulous. We have about 10 questions, and then we'll kind of, go into audience questions from there. So our first question is going to be sort of a broad question, then we'll sort of get into each one of your sort of different areas and things like that from there. So we want to know, a little bit about you and, what area of social work do you practice? Why did you decide to pursue social work? And, how did you get to sort of where you are now? So if you could kind of keep your answers a little bit brief. I know it's, could be a really long story, but we do have lots of other questions to get to. I'm going to pass off Ivan to get us started, and then Dr. Akoni, and then Emily. Oh, I think you're muted, Dr. Godfrey.
Sorry about that. Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. So my name is Dr. Ivan Godfrey. I am a forensic social worker. I actually started my career with the Department of Corrections as a correction officer. And as an officer, was recruited to do EAP work, which is the Employee Assistance Program. And as a result of my work as an EAP, apparently I got, kind of good at it. And someone encouraged me to return to school, to go back to school and get my MSW. And because I was working in the field of criminal justice or law enforcement, when I graduated with my MSW and went on to get my license as an LCSW, when I applied for positions with the Office of Mental Health, again, because of my background in law enforcement, I was a very popular candidate because the Office of Mental Health provides, the New York State Office of Mental Health provides mental health services for 53 New York State prisons across the state of New York. And they did not have a social worker with experience and a background working within the Department of Corrections as a line staff person. So I was very fortunate because my career trajectory was unique in that I had that experience. And I brought that experience with me with my social work degree. And therefore that's how I got into forensic social work. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Akoni.
Yeah, so after when I got my bachelor's in psychology, and I guess like after that, I kind of didn't know exactly what I was going to do. So I taught preschool for a little while. And what I noticed was I was really kind of drawn to try to help the little ones who had some behavioral issues and some outbursts. And there happened to be a social worker there who worked in early intervention social work. And she said, similar to Dr. Godfrey, she said, why don't you go back into, social work? And at that time, I didn't honestly really even know what social work was. So I did. I went back. I got my my MSW, and then from there, I worked at the Huntington Youth Bureau. Where I did prevention and substance use prevention within a bunch of different school districts. I also worked in domestic violence shelter as a children's counselor. And then while I was doing some of the different work with the Huntington Youth Bureau, within the school system, basically there was an opening for a school social worker. They hadn't, this was in 1998. So they never had a school social worker, but they were having a lot of social emotional issues. So I basically applied for the job and got it. And I spent 20 years as a school social worker. I loved it, and had a lot of different, did some human rights education with the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights. Because I was basically teaching a lot of my students about human rights and human rights education. And then I went back for my doctorate and ended up at Stony Brook. So although, not school social work anymore, I do, teach a lot. And I think there's a lot of versions of social work, being a professor and being in this position, that I use a lot of the skills that I used as a school social worker for all those years as well.
Thank you. I think both of you, testament to how much even a mentor or something like that can point you in that direction, and then let you, creates a whole 20-year career. We'll have more questions as well about mentorship. But Emily.
Hi, thanks. I'm Emily Carveth. My pronouns are either she, her, or they, them. I use either. I believe in inclusive pronouns, so whatever people feel comfortable with using. And I just want to make a quick formal land acknowledgement that the land that I live and work on, which is Orange, Connecticut, is the ancestral home of the Golden Hill Pagusset tribe. So I became interested in going into veterinary social work specifically because I worked in veterinary medicine for about 16 years prior to starting my MSW program. I was a vet tech and a vet assistant and worked at the front desk of veterinary hospitals. I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was young. And all that time in vet med just brought to light that there's a lot of systemic and there's lots of things going on in veterinary medicine, both on the staff end and in terms of our wonderful clients need some support. So I was drawn to veterinary social work specifically for that reason, because it's, something like a format I've lived and learned in for such a long time. And then social work specifically, because I also had a beautiful mentor who's now my clinical supervisor, because I'm an LMSW. And she is a social worker, an LCSW, that encouraged me to go into the field at a time when I was really struggling myself. And she was that person that believed in me. So I also really, believe in the power of mentorship.
Fabulous. Yeah, well, I'm going to pass it off to Nicole for the next question.
Yes, thank you all. So this next question is, we just want to know what your day-to-day looks like in your field. So tell us what engagement looks like, assessment, intervention, evaluation. Let's start with Dr. Godfrey.
Okay, so once I started working, I was hired as a psychiatric social worker at Mid-Hudson Forensic Psychiatric Center. So I was part of a team, clinical team, which consisted of a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and myself, who was a licensed clinical social worker, and a custodial staff. And every day, we would review the events on the units that took place with our patients. We had 62 patients. All of our patients were forensic patients because they had been involved in the criminal justice system. In other words, they had committed a crime, but because when they went before the judge, they were found not competent to stand trial, we had to restore them to competency or either keep them committed to the Office of the Mental Health until they were either found competent or not competent and treated. So that typically, those competency orders lasted for 2 years. So anytime in between that 2-year period, when we could restore an individual to competency, we would send him or her back to court to face their charges. So oftentimes we had people who had 2 previous felony convictions, which meant that now that they had been arrested a 3rd time, they were facing a 3 strikes law. So for many of you who understand the 3 strikes law, what that means is if that individual is found guilty and convicted of a 3rd felony conviction, they are sentenced to 25 to life. So many times we had individuals who would fake a mental illness in front of the judge in the court, which is called malingering, right? These individuals would fake mental illness in front of the judge, and they would be sent to us for a 730, what we call a 730 psychiatric evaluation to determine whether they were competent to stand trial or not. So my job during the day was to review the events that took place the previous evening. We also had a list of patients that we would meet every day. We would meet at least 5 to 6 patients every day and go over their case and determine whether or not they were at that time competent to stand trial. And our efforts to restore them to competency involved therapeutic interventions as well as medication. So that's what we did every day. We met with patients, we evaluated them, we had discussions with them. They needed to be able to articulate in a clear and concise way the main roles in the courtroom, which is who is the judge and what is his role, who is defendant, who is the defense attorney, and who is the prosecutor. So they had to articulate that in a clear way that they understood who those individuals were and what their role was in the court in order for us to restore him or her to competency. Once that was accomplished, we would discharge them back to face their charges in court. And some of them would come back, but that was what my day looked like. Every day we would meet with patients, evaluate them, determine whether or not they were competent to stand trial. If they were, we would send them back to court. If they weren't, we would continue to work with them to try to restore them to competency. So that's what my day was like.
Thank you.
Sure.
How about you, Emily?
So no 2 days of mine are exactly the same. There's lots of different things that a veterinary social worker can do. In my current role as what we call an embedded social worker, which means I am on site at the veterinary hospital that I support. I support both the clients and the staff of the hospital. So that could look like a staff member coming to me either on a scheduled basis or just as a drop-in if I'm having open office hours and they're really having a tough day and they're struggling with something either about work or in their personal life. And for the staff member, I work with them on a short-term basis and can be a bridge between the staff member and our EAP that we have, or an outpatient counselor that I would refer them to. I try to help connect them to resources, and same for the pet parents. Typically, the way that I work with pet parents is around grief and loss. So what that can look like is if owners are in the hospital for their pet's euthanasia, I can be with that family before, during, after, whatever the client would like, or the client can always be free to say no to my services. Consent is really, really important in my line of work. So some families don't want me present at all, and some families do. And I also offer short-term grief counseling for pet families of our hospital. I also co-facilitate 2 support groups for our clients, and they're also open to the general public. One for folks who have lost their pet, and one for folks who are caregivers for a pet that has a challenging or terminal illness. And I co-facilitate that with an MSW student who is involved in animal-assisted therapy. That can also mean doing workshops for the staff on psychoeducational workshops, like communication techniques or understanding grief, planning wellness events for the staff, like fun outings or physical activities. So it is definitely a really interesting job. You're never bored on a day-to-day.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Thank you. And Dr. Coney.
Thank you. So similar, I guess, to echoes kind of what Emily just said. School social work, there is never a dull moment, and there's never usually a day that looks like the day before. And it really depends on where you are. You know, there's so many iterations of school social work. In the elementary, I was in the elementary school for 12 years before I went up to the high school for the last 8. And, you know, in the elementary school, it could be doing, you know, a lot of, you know, push-in lessons about social emotional learning. It could be, you know, going outside on the playground and trying to facilitate socialization with the students who, you know, struggle with socialization. It's dealing with helping students deal with conflict. It's also then helping sometimes parents deal with, you know, the manifestation of a behavioral or learning disability, you know, so a lot of, especially in the elementary school, a lot of parent training to help them understand child development, to understand, you know, academically, you know, what's going on for their child. A lot of teacher training as well, to have teachers understand development and childhood development, the way that certain behaviors are the manifestation, a lot of, you know, unmet needs or uncommunicated needs, especially again, for those with developmental and neurotypical, you know, issues. In the high school, it was, you know, it's everything. It's, you know, you can go from like one period to, you know, you have someone coming in who's talking about that they had, you know, a breakup that they need to talk about in the next period. It's someone who might be, you know, talking about suicidality in the next period. You know, someone is talking about that mom got, you know, drunk last night and you know, she's sleeping at a friend's house. And, you know, another time it's, you know, that there's a food insecurity, you know, trying to help, you know, your students basically access services. You try working with some of my undocumented students as well to try to navigate some of the you know, the systems around there. You know, even, you know, for them, helping them understand their rights, you know, as they're going into the college and the college process for some of them. I mean, like, you know, like I said, and that's what makes it so exciting and so exhilarating. It's you're always on your feet and you always, I constantly found myself learning and taking, you know, new professional development, because there was always something I felt like I was always one step behind, right? So I always needed to like try to figure out, you know, social media. How do we, you know, talk about the impact of social media, dating, LGBTQ plus issues, you know, again, a lot of what, you know, working with my minoritized and marginalized population, so they feel safe in the school, because a lot of times they walk into the school system, and especially as of late, they don't feel like, you know, they have a safe haven. So being that safe haven, I created a kind of a wellness room, community drop-in room as an alternative to the cafeteria, because we all know the cafeteria can be one of the worst places in the world if you don't fit in. And so I created, and so, you know, just being in the drop-in room and community center was a big part of my practice. So yeah, so, you know, and again, it's helping students, you know, regulate emotionally, doing behavioral, you know, functional behavioral analysis, who, you know, helping them understand and teachers the function of the behavior, a lot of parent training, a lot of teacher training, a lot of administrative training. So it's what makes it interesting and thinking on your feet constantly. So.
Yes, definitely a lot. It sounds like a lot can happen at any point during the school day. So that's my next internship is actually in a school. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Good. You'll love it.
And then we're going to jump back to Nell for the next question.
Yeah, this next question, if you could sort of think back to, you know, how you were, you know, post-graduation, or also, you know, you all work with students, I know, in different capacities now. So, you know, thinking in that way as well. Our question is, you know, what was it like for you jumping into your first full-time role post-graduation, graduating from your MSW? And do you have any tips about that transition? So we'll start with Ivan, and then we'll go around to Dr. Coney, and then
Okay, so all these questions are great questions, by the way. Interestingly enough, I was working in maximum security prisons with very dangerous people. And I was under the mistaken impression that when I switched over to a psychiatric hospital, that the patients wouldn't be nearly as dangerous as those individuals in the prison system. But I was wrong, because these individuals, because many of them were actively psychotic and didn't know right from wrong in their psychotic, when they were asymptomatic, they could and had done things to other patients and staff that was not nice. And there were a lot of injuries and those kinds of things. So I had to be particularly vigilant around the patients who were actively psychotic. Now, not all of them were actively psychotic every day, but a great many of them were. And because of that, they were dangerous. And so it was interesting making a transition from law enforcement to clinician when I first came out of graduate school, And I had to learn a lot. I had to learn a lot in a short period of time in order for me to stay safe and for me to keep other people safe. I think that my skills as a correction officer helped me through that transitional period, especially around being vigilant and paying attention to everything that was going on around me in that particular setting. But I also became part of a team, whereas I was working independent, and I was working with a partner in corrections, but as a clinical team. So we all counted on each other. And it was important for me to understand the role of the MD, the role of the psychologist, and the role of the psychiatrist, and then my connection to all three of them, because we all had to generate a report. And that report consisted of input from each of us in terms of our professional assessment of who the patient was, where they were in their progress with regard to treatment, and what was our recommendation for that individual. So we all had to come to a consensus about, our patients, each and every one of them. And like I said, we met patients, at least 5 to 6 patients every day, depending on how much time it took. And there were oftentimes patients who did not speak English. English wasn't their native language. And so we had to involve an interpreter. But it was important for us to clearly understand the patient's understanding of his or her role in the hospital and what we were looking for from them, how we were working with them, and how we were able to help them. And so that was interesting. And I never forgot walking away from law enforcement, if you will, and coming into the clinical role, and then fitting in with my other clinical professions, because again, I was intimidated just coming out of graduate school, working in a different arena, and these individuals who were part of my team were clinicians who were working in a hospital setting, you know what I mean, with severely mentally ill patients who had a lot of issues, took a lot of medication. We had to observe them. We met with their families. We got to understand, and we were better able to understand who that person was sitting across the table from us when we had a conversation with their family, and they could tell us who they were before they became actively psychotic or before they started exhibiting symptoms of mental illness. Okay, and in fact, when they committed the crime. So that was a leap, if you will, from where I was to where I needed to go. And I kind of had to hit the ground running, but I learned so much in that brief period. I would say 12 to 18 months to get my feet up under me so I could stand alongside my colleagues and make an authentic contribution to the care and treatment of the patients that we were treating at the psychiatric hospital.
Right. It sounds like it was a different way of approaching how you worked with the patients, from to more of like looking at the larger picture, looking at, the different supports in the family and how can we, support them as a whole person. So, yeah, thank you. I'll pass it over to Dr. Coney for that. What was it like for you jumping into your first full-time role post-graduation, and do you have any tips about that transition?
Yeah, so I think that for my first full-time role at the Huntington Youth Bureau, I think the first thing I said is just intimidated and feeling like, a bit of the imposter syndrome, like, because you're just like, okay, now I'm supposed to like know things, right? Like, because I have this MSW in front of my name, after my name. So there was definitely, it took a little bit of a leap to kind of get over there. And I, at the Youth Bureau, when I did prevention work and I went into into the schools and did the prevention work, I was, I realized that I never realize how much like I loved being in front of actually a classroom and you know, being with kids that age. You know, I knew when I taught preschool, but I think my biggest like when I think about it is when I became a school social worker, a full-time school social worker, and it was that feeling again then of like, whoa, like and the example that I always use is so I was doing some part-time school social work when I was full-time at the school at the youth bureau. And then I eventually ended up in a full-time job split between two elementary schools. The one elementary school was the one place I had been in for a while, so I knew everybody. The second elementary school was the new elementary school to me, so I didn't really know anyone. My first day there was September 11th, 2001. So that was like my like thing of where everyone was like running to me and being like, what should we do? How do we handle this? And I was in a district where a lot of the parents worked on Wall Street, and you know, a lot of the parents were first responders. So, you know, there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of, and, you know, for the first time in my life, I felt when everybody was running to me, I just like, you know, it was like that moment of like, why am I supposed to, just because again, it's because I'm a social worker, why am I supposed to know all this? And what that taught me is the ability to say like, you know what, I don't know right now what to do. Nobody knows how to handle this. Nobody knows how to handle what's going on right now. You know, give me a little bit of time. And I think to what, you know, Dr. Godfrey was talking about, like just working in a team and being able to like, what I really you know, learned from that experience was it's not me by myself, it's me within this like larger team. And, you know, like I said, I think you know, it takes a long time, I think, especially for the clinical skills to really feel like, you know, comfortable in your craft. I honestly think like I wasn't comfortable. And I have my LCSW probably until I was about 10 years into it, where I really like felt like, you know, so there, you know, it's constantly battling that, like, am I doing this right? You know, am I saying the right thing? Am I, you know, what happens if I do this? And then that's where supervision like comes in, you know, like I said, and the whole things. So that whole long-winded story is just to say like that, you know, you can't do this on your own, that you need support, and that you need to know when to ask for help and when to say, you know what, I don't know. And then it's okay not to know, because there are certain things that that nobody knows, and it's, you know, trying to get those answers together and then to really have good supervision and continuing professional development, like always, you know. So
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. A lot of people graduate and they think, you know, oh, I don't feel like I know enough. Like, I don't feel like I know. And you know, be assured like, oh yeah, that's normal. And like that a lot of those skills might, you know, over time through supervision. Yeah, that's great. So how about you, Emily?
Oh, wow. I just love what folks have shared so far. And I really do want to echo Dr. Akoni about not trying to go it alone, and asking for the help that you need. Um, and there's like so much I want to say. It's really fresh in my mind because I only graduated in 2022. So this was my first job out of grad school and like my dream job. And I had a logical idea of that it would be difficult. And I did not have a felt an emotional sense of how difficult it was. It has been a very hard year and a half. And I did learn very quickly that I could not go it alone because I'm the only mental health professional in my hospital system. And that can be incredibly lonely and very intimidating, especially if you're working in a field that can have some systemic bias against mental health care and against mental health practitioners. Veterinary medicine is one of those fields historically. So it's been a bit of an uphill slog. So I learned right away to plug in immediately to my network of other veterinary social workers around the country. Thankfully, there's a really nice email listserv that most of us in the United States and a couple of our new folks in Canada are on. And I just learned to be vulnerable and be honest about where I was at and just go, oh my gosh, you know what? I'm the one that's struggling right now. and the love and support that I got from other social workers who are a little further along than me, like, it's okay that you don't feel like you know everything right now, because you don't. And, it's okay to need help. It's okay to ask for extra supervision. I see my clinical supervisor twice a week, and I have been doing that for months because of my particular work situation. And something I learned along the way, especially with my clinical supervisor, is to be discerning about the ways that you personally like to work, and to play around with that and think about that as things like, what do you want your workspace to look like? What do you want your work schedule to look like? Do you want to explore work from home options? And I do want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from a place of privilege right now, because not everyone is in the economic situation, life situation, to be able to be extra discerning. And that makes sense. And I want to honor that too. And if you have the opportunity to practice some discernment and let me check in with my gut and see if I can start crafting my job. And asking questions of the places that you interview for, like, why would it be a good fit for you? It can be a collaborative process, a job interview. I didn't really do that at the beginning. I kind of just took it piecemeal. And in hindsight now, I wish I had more of a collaborative conversation with the folks I was interviewing with to co-create my position, if that makes sense. So I think that's what I want to leave people with the most, is if you have some gut feelings about your preferred ways of working, if you have the privilege to explore that, do it. That's what I'm doing now, and my life is shifting in a very positive direction. I hope that all made sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. I'm going to pass it off to Nicole for our next question.
So we've kind of been touching on the concept and the importance of teamwork, but then all three of you talked about mentorship a little bit in the beginning. And so this next question is about the importance of mentorship to you all. And then who do you consider your mentors, formal, informal, and in different stages of your life, where did you meet them? And were you a student? Were you already in the field? So I know that's a lot to throw at you, but can you give us any tips on how we as students and moving forward can pursue somebody who we would like to be our mentor? And we'll go with Dr. Godfrey. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I would say at this point, my mentor would be Dr. Darrell Wheeler. Dr. Darrell Wheeler was the chair of the social work department at UAlbany when I first started teaching. I teach a forensic social work course, forensic social work and criminal justice course at UAlbany in the graduate program. And Dr. Darrell Wheeler was the chair of the social work department. And he gave a lecture. So he was promoted and gave a lecture right before his departure that was just phenomenal around the responsibility, obligation, and commitment for social workers coming into the field of social work, the issues around social justice, the issues around self-determination, issues around honoring patients in spite of the fact that what they may be engaging in is not in their best interest. He is now the president of New Paltz University, recently appointed the president of New Paltz University. I was very impressed with him when he was at UAlbany. I bumped into him at a restaurant in Ulster County, and we had a very lively conversation. And so I would say if there's someone who you feel can help you grow in your profession, in your career as a social worker, I would say make that connection and nurture it. Nurture that that connection, because that when you come up with challenges in your role as a social worker, that's your go-to person. That's who you want to reach out to. And the other part of the question, I think you said, what helps young social workers in their career. Is that right? Was that one?
I think it was more of like, at different stages in your career. So yes, what kind of mentorship do you need in those, at the beginning, in the middle, where you are now?
Okay. I think right now it's at this point in time in my career, it's calming down. So I'm looking back at some of the mistakes I made, the assumptions I had about either the work that I was doing or the population that I was working with, and analyzing and processing those decisions, because I think those decisions or those assumptions, right, help me to grow, to formulate and make better choices moving forward. And so, for me, process is very important. When an event takes place, whether it's with a client, a patient, or a coworker, or a policy that my agency is supporting that may not necessarily be in the best interest of the client that I'm working with regard to advocacy, I need to be able to go to my supervisor and make a case for what I believe is in the best interest of the client. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to get my way, but what it does mean is that I'm finding my voice, my ability to speak up and challenge, right, tradition. Because as the human race evolves, what was okay 2 years ago may not necessarily be okay today. What was appropriate, last year, 6 months ago, may not necessarily be appropriate right now. We evolve. The field of social work has grown so much with regard to forensics and testifying in court as an expert witness. That's one of the things that a lot of my students, when I talk to them about that, they shy away from. But the reality is that they're the next generation of forensic social workers that are going to be advocating for a population of individuals that are really viewed as the lowest, all right, on the spectrum. We're talking about drug addicts, alcoholics, domestic violence, and on and on and on. And these people, they suffer from low self-esteem because of the trauma that they experienced growing up. You know what I mean? And the environment that they were in, and where they learned criminal thinking and how to navigate the system without going through the traditional career trajectory, if you will. All right, but looking for shortcuts all the time. So again, I would say, with those steps, the mentors, the people that help me, I've always stayed in touch with them. I've always reached out to them, and they've been very receptive. I've been fortunate enough to have good teachers, good mentors who have made themselves available to me. And so I've nurtured those relationships by making sure I stay in touch with them.
Thank you, Dr. Godfrey.
Sure.
How about you, Emily?
I agree 100%. Mentorship and networking and like keeping those connections strong is the way that I've survived and started to thrive in my work as a social worker. My primary mentor is my clinical supervisor. Her name is Tawana Woolfolk. She's an LCSW in West Haven, Connecticut. So she's in private practice, but she also does intensives, like outpatient intensives. So she does a lot of like different forms of treatment and different modalities of healing. And she's such an exciting person to be around. And she's been there for me through lots of different stages of my life. And for me, it's been really helpful to have someone in my life who understands me on a personal and a professional level, someone that I can be comfortable sharing all facets of myself and showing up as my messy human self. Like, she's like, bring all of it to the table, because it helps craft who you are. Anyone in your life that you can show up fully around, nurture that connection. So that can be your friends, that can be your partner, that can be another social worker that you work with, like a peer. I have a wonderful peer support. Lauren Crowley is a psychotherapist who practices animal assisted therapy. So if you like kind of search around for folks that work in your niche area of social work, I mean, I even at the beginning, I went gangbusters at networking, and I got on LinkedIn and I started following everyone I possibly could that was even sort of related to veterinary social work or veterinary coaching or holistic ways of looking at veterinary medicine and veterinary mental health. And I would just message them if they accepted my connection and just, hey, I'd love to set up a Zoom call. And so along the way, I have befriended an animal chaplain and a veterinary consultant, just lots of different folks, but we're all looking at the same thing with just slightly different lenses. And I learned so much from other folks, even in different professions too. I've learned so much from some of the veterinarians and the veterinary technicians I've worked with, those who are like my real mental health champions in the workplace. But it all comes down to, I think the most important thing is discerning those folks who you do not have to put up a front in front of. Those are your people. Keep those folks close, because those are the people that will help steward you through the messiest parts of this work.
I love that. Thank you. And Dr. Oconee.
Yeah, I think, like I said, what you both said, just so resonated with me. And I think school social work, like a lot of social work, like you a lot of times you're by yourself, you're one of one. And I think because of that, I found mentors and, I found my people, I guess, in a lot of different places. And the school psychologist who I worked with, her name is Dr. Wendy Moss. I think, clinically, she definitely mentored me and helped me along the way, really kind of learning the ropes. But I think because social work is different, obviously, from psychology, what I did was, especially when I found myself kind of again a party of one with some of the social justice issues, like needing partners, I would go out to different organizations, like the Anti-Defamation League, and like I said, that's how I got involved with the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Human Rights. Different organizations and mentors within those organizations that help elevate human rights and social justice, and had ways of doing it within the school system, I think were the people that I really needed, to kind of help again do some of the work that can be frankly very lonely within a school system, to be the one that's always ringing the bells about how the minoritized students are feeling and how isolated people are. And so I think, so I've had a lot of different mentors in a lot of different places, like that. When I went back for my PhD, Dr. Richard Morgan, who's still at Stony Brook, he was an incredible mentor, just helping me through my doctorate program, but then also as I was still in a school social work position, trying to navigate all those things simultaneously, working on a doctorate and being a full-time school social worker. So a shout out to him. I think I have this, incredible group of people that I would call my social justice warriors within the school system. One was an English teacher, one was an administrator, one was a special ed teacher, and they were all the people that when we saw some of the things that were going on within the school system, that that we were able to come together and create do what we needed to do to create a safe environment for our students who felt very unsafe. So yeah, I think like piggybacking off of what Emily said, to find your tribe, no matter what they, no matter who they might be, and just really, keeping that source of strength. What I found out later in my career, so, obviously the New York State School Social Work Association, I'm now on the board. So later in my career, unfortunately, I didn't know about them earlier in my career, but having that organization to basically have other school social workers. So now, that's kind of what I really want to try to continue to do, is organize school social workers, because, depending, it could be very isolating work. So.
Yes, thank you all. I think the panelists have done a really good job of kind of like pulling from all the questions that we have prepared for you all. You've kind of like combined them into a really beautiful summary. So I appreciate that. That kind of touches on that. Our next question that we had thought about in terms of like, how do you reconcile your role and your purpose in your job with those social work values? So thank you for that. But then we'll jump to the next question, and Nell's going to take that one.
Yeah, so this is for back to sort of the folks who are just graduating and thinking about the job search. So do you have any tips for new graduates, either BSW or MSW, looking for a social work job? Where to look, ways to approach the job search? So I'll pass it off to Dr. Godfrey, and then Dr. Coney, and then Emily.
Okay, I would say the thing that helped me then and has helped me a great deal is networking and attending conferences. I mean, I attended every conference that had anything at all to do with social work. I remember after I graduated my first year, I went to a conference in Los Angeles, and I'm from New York, but I went and I met another graduate at that conference. It was a social work conference in Los Angeles, and we had a marvelous time. But I met some fabulous people. I mean, there were innovative things, studies, there were innovative strategies that people were having discussions around that are commonplace today, but they weren't back then. And so it broadened my horizon and my scope in terms of whatever else could I do with an MSW, besides working in the field of law enforcement and forensics. I met people who were social workers, people who were going to school to be social workers. I met people who gave me the business cards, who wanted to hire me at these conferences, because I had just graduated. So there's just so many opportunities and different things to look at and consider when you attend conferences and when you network. And now that you have social media, that's just a whole nother venue where you can explore. You can talk to people that are working in different fields and I remember meeting a social worker from California who was working with people who were about to go to prison. And his job was to prepare them. He was a correction officer in California. I'm a correction officer in New York, right? East Coast, West Coast. And he was preparing people who knew they were getting ready to go to prison because they needed to know what they were going to be involved with. You know what I mean? What they were looking forward to. And the families wanted to know what that was going to mean to them and how they were going to be able to navigate their life with this chair, missing person in prison while they waited. And there were wives who didn't know what to do, who needed help with that. And when I first heard about it, the first thought that came to my mind was ambulance chaser. Somebody chasing, because it would seem as though we were taking advantage of someone else's misfortune. You know what I mean? Depending on how you look at it, in what context. However, the reality is that there are people, especially politicians, who have been caught with their hand in the cookie jar and know they are going to prison and need help coming to terms with, okay, I'm going away, right? For how many years? How am I going to navigate that system? And how is my family going to prepare for me going away? It's a real profession. It's something to do. I didn't decide to go into that field, but I just thought it was so innovative and just out of the box that there are people who are willing to pay large sums of money to help them understand what it means to go to prison. And by the way, I'm just going to add this, that once you've worked in prison for as long as I had and become a social worker, and you understand the nuances that are involved with people who are doing a lot of time, prison is not that bad, at least in New York State, because you can go to prison. Right now, you can go to college, get your associate's degree, you can get a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. If you're married, you can get what they call conjugal visits. Now they call it family reunification program, where you can go into a trailer once a month with your wife or your mother, all right, or your family member, as long as they, right, and spend time with them in that trailer for the weekend, okay? Many times I took my class to a maximum security prison for a field visit, all right, my criminal justice students. And one of the inmates said that he had done 23 years in prison, right? They were all in there for murder. And he had done 23 years in prison. And his 12th year, he met somebody, got married, she got pregnant, and now he has a 10-year-old son. So he's doing a lot of time in prison, but he met somebody, started a family. They come to visit him regularly. That's all I mean by prison is not that bad. And I'm not suggesting that you go to prison and find out. I'm not. What I'm saying is, as a social worker working with the forensic population, right, you can help them, all right, navigate that system in a way that doesn't seem like all is lost and all is hopeless. There are ways to go in and figure out how to do your time and still remain a human being while you're in there. So I would say, yeah, that would be my, yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Akoni. Yeah, if you have any sort of tips for folks looking for a job, ways to approach it.
Yeah, so I just put in the chat box the New York State School Social Work Association, the way that you need to have a school social work certification from New York State. For those of you that are in New York State, this is New York State specific, but you can apply for it in your spring of your before you get your master's. I'm sorry, long day. So you don't have to wait until you graduate is what I'm trying to say, before you can apply for your New York State with your master's, before you can apply for your New York State school certification. So I really, for those that are interested in school social work, to be able to look at that website, there's tons of information about, from soup to nuts, what you need to do to get certified. And then also, I'll put the other link in here, as far as like looking for a job for, and again, this is New York State specific, but you want to go on OLAS for that. And hold on for a second. And then in the city, it's different. It's the DOE. So you want to go on the Department of Education website. All this to say is that right now, we're in a period of a recognition of that we're in a mental health crisis, especially for children and young adults. And because of that, there's a lot of school social workers being added to the, and then there was a lot of in the Build Back Better monies as well. There's a lot of money for, to be able to support school mental health. So right now is a time where I've seen a lot of positions open. So what I wanted to say also as well, because a lot of them in my role at Stony Brook as assistant dean, I see a lot of organizations will contact us and say, we need a social worker. And I'm telling you on a daily basis, I get things basically saying we need a social worker here to, please send out to your alumni. So that being said, because we are where we are, and there's finally, I think, a recognition of what we bring to the world, which it always wasn't always this way, right? To really, as much as you can, depending on where you were and your, what you need to do as far as to support yourself financially, to really not settle. That would be my thing, because there is a recognition of our skill set, of what we bring to the table, and that we are really essential at this point to really keep looking for jobs that resonate with you and resonate with, what you think you were put on, why you're here in this world. So yeah, so and whether it's LinkedIn, different organizations, it's so interesting. I just saw anyone watch Ted Lasso? Love Ted Lasso. So there's a psychologist that actually works with the sports team, and I just saw that there was actually the NHL was actually hiring social workers to help some of the wives of some of the players who had some brain injuries, and they were talking about basically social workers in sports. So this is all to say that there's a lot. If we go in the New York State Office of Mental Health, they have tons of openings to just be open to just within this panel itself. There's so much that we can do, and to really to really take all the skills and everything that you have and all the gifts you bring to the world, and don't settle for for less than you deserve, I guess. And understanding that some of this comes with a level of privilege if you're able to kind of navigate and be able to find a place. But that's what I would say. So yeah.
Yeah, and somebody had a quick sort of clarifying question of the links that you dropped in there, particularly the school social work certification. This is applicable even if you haven't studied for school social work. Is that correct?
Yeah, so in New York State, again, different states like
Yeah.
California is different. In New York State, all you need is your master's in social work. You don't need to have studied, there's no classes that you need to take, that it's just basically that you need to, you need your master's in social work in order to be a school social worker. And that's why you can start the certification process in the spring of your second year.
Great, thank you. And then I'll pass it off to Emily.
All right. I love, thank you, Dr. Coney, for the idea of throwing the links in. So I just did the same thing for my area of social work, veterinary social work. The formal certificate program that's available for VSWs is through the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. And that's the vetsocialwork.utk.edu. They have a job board where they'll list veterinary social worker job postings. And it's a similar thing as what Dr. Coney mentioned. You do not have to go through the UTK program to be hired as a veterinary social worker. It definitely helps because it gives, especially if you're not familiar with veterinary medicine, it definitely gives you a really good grounding in the things that veterinary professionals and pet parents grapple with. Or I would just recommend, if you are interested in becoming a VSW, like you see a job posting, the veterinarysocialwork.org is our international association's website. I would highly recommend reaching out to them to see if they can put you in touch with a veterinary social worker that's local to you, so you can ask them questions. Like, I actually do this somewhat frequently, is meet with folks over Zoom or go for coffee if they're local and just tell them about the position. Because I want folks to know what they're getting into if they're not familiar with vet med before. If you are really interested in that area, you could even ask a veterinary hospital near you if they are willing to have you shadow them for a day or two. That's a wonderful way to get an idea of kind of the day in a life of a veterinary hospital. And then I also do really recommend LinkedIn as just a way to broaden your network. On LinkedIn, you can put a little banner on your profile picture that says you're open to work, and you can specify if you only want it visible to recruiters or people who are hiring. So maybe you don't want your personal contacts to see that. There's options. And it's a great way to, LinkedIn is a great way to hype yourself, like you can put, if you've ever spoken on a podcast before or directed any, or, like posted any YouTube videos, you can link to your Instagram if you do mental health content over Instagram. The other, I know this is an option in Connecticut. I'm hoping it's the case in other state, is on Facebook. There are a couple of private, like secret Facebook groups for mental health professionals in the state of Connecticut. And I'm a member of a couple of them. And that has been enormously helpful in for me looking for referral sources, but people post job openings all the time. So depending on where you are, you may want to do a quick search for like a secret group. It's secret, so we don't share any identifying information for clients. But that has been a fabulous way to get connected to people and kind of know who's out there and who's looking.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, so many different ideas and yeah, opportunities to get involved in a lot of different areas of social work. So I'm going to pass it off to Nicole. So definitely get your questions sort of going, because I know it is, now around 8:10. So we're going to, have one more sort of final question for our presenters today. And then, pass it off to audience members for Q&A. I know we've already got some really awesome questions generated. So definitely for folks who are listening, if you have any sort of other questions that you're, after hearing our panelists speak and you really want to hear their perspective on something, feel free to type it in the chat. We'll get to it. We've already had, one or two, so we'll get the, first couple that have come across, and then we'll sort of get to yours as they come up. So definitely get started thinking about it while we sort of ask our final question here. So I'm going to pass it to Nicole to ask that final question.
Thank you. Yeah, so wrapping things up with this question, what are you all excited to see fresh graduates take on in the social work profession within the near future? And then what excites you about the new generation of social workers? And we'll start with Dr. Godfrey.
So, as some of you may or may not be aware of the fact that there is something called the Innocence Project. Okay. So the Innocence Project, for those of you who don't know, is it's a pro bono legal organization that reviews individuals who are on death row to determine if their case needs to be re-reviewed, because there have been a huge number of reversals based on DNA evidence that was found after the fact. And there are some people who have been on death row for 10, 20 years, even 30 years, who have been exonerated because they found DNA evidence that cleared their name, right, and reversed their guilty conviction. That field is looking for social workers to help with the investigative work, to question family members, to question witnesses, to question the district attorney or the public offender who was on the case, maybe who's retired now and may have a different opinion of, what really took place. So I see that as a growing field for social workers, individuals who want to work in the field of forensic social work. Working with someone on death row is not easy, but if you can give them hope that you're at least looking into their case, and someone else makes the decision whether or not they think that their particular case is worthy of reviewing. All right, but once you're a member of that team, you play a pivotal role in identifying individuals who played a role in the outcome of that case, and you would be interviewing those individuals to get corroborating information. And I just give you an example. There was an individual who was found guilty of murder, and because the criminal justice system is punitive, as many of you know, and sometimes people who are innocent are found guilty in spite of the fact that they claim innocence. Well, this one individual told the district attorney that he wasn't even in New York at the time the crime was committed. But they believed that he was, because he had a previous record of engaging in, I think it was a burglary that turned into a murder. Anyway, this individual, when the Innocence Project began to look at his case, he claims that he was at Disney World when the crime took place. They went back, looked at the clothing that he had at that time, because they had still collected, they had the evidence locker, they had an evidence container with his name on it, with all of the evidence that they used to convict him. And when they went and opened that container, that box up, and looked in his back pocket, he had a receipt from a ride in Disney World in Florida for that date and time. They got the receipt out of the pocket, got in touch with the manager at Disney World, that got them to go back into the records and validate that ticket for that day and that time. That individual was exonerated. He was on death row, soon to be executed. So that's the kind of stuff that excites me about social work. The other thing is, when I was working as a forensic social worker at the Bureau of Forensic Services, there were individuals who were being released from prison, being rearrested. Their parole was revoked, which means they were returned to prison. Now, these individuals, many of them had mental illness. So what we did as a team was we developed a team, and we called it the return to prison. I'm trying to think of the acronym, but basically the program was, if there was individuals in the community that had been released from prison 3 years prior, and they were rearrested and sent to Rikers Island, right? Those individuals, if they received mental health services while they were in prison, we had set up a case manager on Rikers Island who would put them individuals on a call out and evaluate them. And if mental illness played any role in their rearrest, those individuals would automatically be diverted to an administrative law judge for the division of parole. That individual, they would speed his hearing. He or she would have a hearing. Again, if they determine that mental illness played any role in their rearrest, they would be diverted back away from prison, back to treatment in the community. Okay. And then those individuals would receive treatment. They would receive a case manager, and that saved the taxpayers millions of dollars, because we're not sending people back to prison. We're giving them treatment. And these individuals had an Axis I diagnosis of mental illness. Okay. So it saved the taxpayers money. All right. it took a strain off the prison system because we're continuing to punish people for being sick. And in our society, we don't punish people for being sick, we treat them. We punish people for breaking the law. But if people who break the law are sick, then we need to treat them. You know what I mean? So there's a dual purpose here. One is to remove them from society, all right, so they don't continue to commit crimes. But at the same time, we also need to treat the mental illness so we can stabilize them so they can be productive members of society. And one of the ways to do that is to divert people away from prison and jail back to the community with treatment that will allow them to be stabilized and be productive members of society, or at the very least, continue to take their medication so that they can live productive lives. So I would say, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Godfrey. It sounds like a great opportunity for new social workers to practice their advocacy skills, and appreciate that. Emily, go ahead.
Sure. I am so excited by the new generation of social work and what, at least from my experience, they're starting to teach about really grounding an awareness of implicit and explicit bias, and really owning that for ourselves and recognizing where we're starting from when we begin our work, I think just sets people on such a better footing towards socially just, equitable practice. And I really, I think people are super interested in this and really are willing to dive into those hard conversations. At least that's what I saw when I was in school. Like it was uncomfortable and it hurt, but it's necessary. We need to know what baggage we're coming in with before we start as practitioners. And I see this new generation as being very socially justice focused, and that excites me so much. It gives me, fresh air under my wings when I start to feel tired and maybe there's no point in advocacy. Like, no, there's so much power in it. I don't ever want folks to lose that passion for speaking out against something that's important to them and something that they, rightfully judge as unjust. Like, I love that Dr. Godfrey was talking about the Innocence Project. I think movements like this are incredible. We've viewed so many groups in society through a punishing and demonizing lens, and we can start to look at that differently now. And it's okay for us as social workers to look at the role of social work as being complicit in that in years past. It's all right. Like, we can acknowledge it, we can learn from it, and we can move forward and try to be better as people. There's always an opportunity to grow and innovate your practice. I know I feel like I have so much more to say, but I just, that's the excitement that I feel.
Yes, thank you for touching on that complicit, that social works can be complicit in the systems that we work in. So Dr. Coney, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just really quickly to echo what both of the panelists said, like what excites me the most, and especially teaching new social workers, is really the passion that they have for dismantling the systems that don't work and anymore. And like I said, and to me that to be in the classroom to me is an honor and such a privilege to be able to help facilitate some of that. The awakening of a lot of what's going on in society needs to be dismantled and rebuilt. And to me, I see a real great a generation of social workers that are willing to do the work to rebuild, right? Because I feel like that's what we're doing right now. We're in this space in the world where so much is falling apart, but I like to think that it's also an opportunity that so much can be rebuilt. And I just see a lot of new social workers with the passion and the vision to look at things differently. that, maybe than we did, and to create a world that looks different. So yeah, and as far as school social work, it's the same thing, to be able to stand up to those oppressive voices that are taking books out of school, that are saying you can't teach this and you can't say this and you can't do that, and to be to stand up. And it takes a lot of courage to stand up to and speak truth to power. So I'm always, every day, so excited by my students who are able, who have that inside of them, or just, to the point of like, enough is enough. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you all so much for your awesome responses to our panel questions. And I know that we didn't get to all of the questions that we prepared for you, but we really did want to include some questions from other folks who attended today. So I'm going to go up to the first few questions that we got and kind of work it down. One of our first questions we got was, how do you feel about providers seeking clients via social media? I'm all for access for clients, finding more, or I'm all for access for clients and finding more clients online, but I feel like social media is a little gray, especially with therapists not following ethical guidelines on those platforms. So I wonder, maybe Dr. Coney, you could sort of let us know your thoughts on that question. And
yeah, there's a lot to that question, and it's kind of new, right? A lot of it came out of COVID with the telehealth. So there's a lot of mixed research about like the impact of the effectiveness, of telehealth. And obviously we can get people that might not have had access to it, but at the same time, really just looking whether it's effective or not. And going out, I feel like I don't know how to answer that question as far as being able to find clients on social media. Because again, if you're not a part of kind of a practice and a supervision and everything, and it's just you on your own going out, like something just doesn't sit great with me, only because of, like we've all spoken about, the depth and of the work. And I always say that like social work to me honestly is a sacred profession, and we have a responsibility to make sure like we don't do harm. And and just making sure that if you are going out on your own and getting people through social media, like that your ethics are formed. I don't know. I feel like I'm not articulating it because I can't kind of get my head around what I'm trying to say, except for the fact that it kind of it makes me uncomfortable. So
yeah, and I think Emily, I know that you have some social media presence too, and Dr. Godfrey as well. So Emily, why don't you, and then Dr. Godfrey.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways that this can shake out, and you do have to be extremely careful. And I've made some mistakes along the way. For example, like if you're in a setting like mine where your coworkers are your clients, I would be extremely careful if you accept any friend requests. Probably don't. It's not really a great idea. I wouldn't necessarily like communicate a lot of things over instant messenger, because I do think it could be really easy to overutilize your position of power, I would say. So just like like, for example, me, I am pivoting towards a private practice, but I would not necessarily like use my personal platform at all to reach out to someone like, hey, I heard you're looking for a therapist. Like, my practice, it would give me the ick, like to use a popular expression. So I think like, say if what we're talking about is like DMing folks on social media and go, hey, I'm available if you need a therapist, I don't think that's appropriate. However, having a social media presence is not necessarily harmful because it could be a great repository for positive content and for people to learn. But let's have let's steer those folks towards, like, say, your practice website, where it's an anonymous way to book a call with you, and you go through the established channels first. I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but and I'm all for showing up as myself, but also, yes, let's protect our clients. I would just really worry if a client was discussing something deeply personal over DM. There's not the level of privacy that there is in a counseling session. So I wouldn't want to do it.
Dr. Godfrey, if you have any thoughts or advice to share on this.
I would just say that, I have a private practice and I do telehealth. However, my first meeting with clients is in person. It has to be in person to do an initial assessment and evaluation, to see if it's a good fit, first and foremost. And then depending on the distance that, the commute that's required, we can, on my private account, we can meet me and the client. But social media doesn't play a role at all. I would mimic what Emily and Dr. Akoni said. The word I would use is uncomfortable too. I would be uncomfortable, going into that area, because there's just so many, I think, pitfalls that could create a problem for someone. That's just my own perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I wish that we could get to so many more questions, but it is 8:30.
Yeah.
And it's been such a pleasure to, speak with you and hear from you, hear from all of you. And I think that, given your, wealth of knowledge and experience, each one of you, it, makes it a really awesome experience to share with students, future students and things like that. So definitely, for folks who, who joined tonight, you're welcome to type to, share your feedback with us at this link. And as well, Dr. Godfrey, your panelists, if you're open to having people, contact you if they have further questions, you're welcome to type in the chat, your contact. If not, no pressure. But we would love to, get your feedback by, if you click that Survey Monkey. And thank each one of you. I don't know, Nicole, if you have any other, final thoughts.
No, I think that the panelists really went above and beyond. So I really appreciate all of your responses. They're so thoughtful and really, really helped. I think it's so helpful to hear that it's just like a vast difference in your practices, but they're very similar because it is social work. So thank you.
Yeah, and I see some folks have already shared their email, so it's awesome. And definitely, I know that there were a few questions that we couldn't get to that that were definitely specific to, like, how do I get started in veterinary social work? So that's great. Folks can sort of follow up individually. But thank you all for joining tonight, and thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Nicole and May. And we will stop recording and end Zoom.
Thank you for having us. What it was. Thank you.
Thank
Nice
you.
meeting you with everybody.
Yeah, I just wanna say, I want to thank my esteemed colleagues on the panel, Emily Carveth and Dr. Akoni. Thank you so much. I also want to thank Nicole and Nellie Thank you for inviting me. This was an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And I wish you good luck to all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
best
you.
of luck, everybody. Yes, the same thing. It's so interesting. It's so fascinating hearing from both of your both of your journeys in social work. I think that's what makes social work so neat, that there's like these really different things that you can do with it. So thank you both. And thank you, Nell and Nicole, and thanks. Good luck, everybody.
Yeah, I just want to echo what both Dr. Godfrey and Dr. Coney, I loved being in community with all of you tonight and learning from two amazing colleagues and specialties I know zero about. So this was so exciting. And I'm really, and I truly mean it when I welcome you all that are attending tonight to contact me. I love this aspect of social work. If I can help you in any way, further your career, that it's a gift to be able to do that. So please keep in touch.
Great.
Same here as
And
well.
good luck to everybody that's like about to graduate or is just finishing up those last papers and those last presentations.
Oh God.
I
You
include
got it.
my contact information in the chat box. So if anybody needs to contact me or you have any questions about forensic social work or anything that I discussed this evening, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Definitely. All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank
Have a good night,
you.
everybody.
Take care.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.